This podcast is a kind of response to the previous two that I've just done. So I did one, the previous one called We Are the Nightmare, and the one before that was on the definitions and axioms in part one of Spinoza's Ethics. Kind of a contrast, isn't there? Anyway, the previous one, We Are the Nightmare, is up there on YouTube. It's for, general distribution, if you want to call it that. It's for anybody to view. And there seem to be a lot of people viewing these podcasts. I think it's up to, I don't know, 400 or 500 within just over a day. Which astonishes me. And I get some very nice feedback from people. I mean, I get some insulting stuff as well, but the podcasts of that nature that are just, really, it's the same old song that I've been playing on YouTube for a while, which is basically, well, here's the shit show, here's how it works, and maybe there's a solution to it. And a lot of people take some comfort from that for some reason. I get some very nice emails from people. Anyway, as for general release, you'll notice that those that I put out for general release have a different flavour to them to those that are on Patreon. Because on Patreon, I don't spend all my time whining about the nature of life. That isn't what I do, particularly. I do it on the ones on YouTube because people kind of empathise with that, and they don't feel alone anymore. Because many people think things that they don't voice. In fact, I've just had an email about an hour ago from some guy. He's about my age, mid-60s, and he said, well, I've thought these things, but I would never dare say them. I would never dare say them. It takes a fool like me to do that. Anyway, so that's the nature of those podcasts. I don't do them on Patreon because you can go to YouTube if you want to hear all the whining. But I feel that people who are on Patreon are looking for something substantial to help them with their lives and to understand. The one before that, on the definitions and axioms, well, it's very easy to get lost in all the details with Spinoza. And I was aware, and I don't think there's any other way to produce that podcast. We just have to grit our teeth sometimes and go through the nitty-gritty of the detail. And that's what I did to some extent on that podcast. I will at some point produce a more flowery version of all of that with a bit of emotion in it rather than just going through the definitions and axioms. But for now, that's what we do. But anyway, so in response to those two podcasts, the one that is basically kind of doom and gloom, and the other one that is detail. I had images of people sticking red hot pins in their eyes to stay awake while they were listening to it. Or, well, maybe not, but anyway, I want to do this one on the Genius of Spinoza. It's really a summary of the whole of what Spinoza is about. And Spinoza clearly went through the kind of torment at some point that we all go through that are interested in this kind of thing. We look at life and we just think, well, there's something not right here. It's just not very satisfying. What the fuck is it all about? So I've got a quote here. It's from right at the beginning of The Improvement of the Understanding. And it tells us a lot. We glibly read these things, but actually every sentence Spinoza is giving something away. So he says, after experience had taught me the hollowness and futility of everything that is ordinarily encountered in daily life. Well, he must have suffered to realize that. He must have tried it all and found it all wanting. And then he goes on to say, and I realized that all the things which were the source and object of my anxiety held nothing of good or evil in themselves, save insofar as the mind was influenced by them. And that's a very deep statement. It's very zen. It's very zen. It's very In Zen there's a saying that the only thing that separates us from enlightenment is choosing one thing over another. Well, here he's saying that, well, actually there's nothing good or evil in anything. It's just how it affects me. And that's the important thing. How does something affect you? A 40-ton truck is a fairly innocent thing, unless it's heading towards you at 60 miles an hour and you haven't got time to get out of the way. Or, when clearly that's going to affect you in a fairly major way. Or, anything. You see your partner schmoozing with somebody else down a back alley, down a back alley or something. That's going to affect you. But is there anything evil or wrong about that? Well, you can moralize about it, but basically it's just two people having a bit of a good time. Anyway, we could talk more about that. But so the things in themselves are neither here nor there. It's just the way that our mind is influenced by them. So he says, I resolved at length to inquire whether there existed a true good, one which was capable of communicating itself. Isn't that an interesting word or phrase, communicating itself, and could alone affect the mind to the exclusion of all else? So Spinoza is not interested in the shit show at all. Zero interest in the shit show. He wants his mind to be influenced by something which he calls truly good, and for it to be wholly engrossing. So one which was capable of communicating itself and could alone affect the mind to the exclusion of all else, whether in fact there was something whose discovery and acquisition would afford me a continuous and supreme joy to all eternity. Spinoza did not want to live a miserable life. Now, most people would say they don't want to live a miserable life, but actually they do. They like complaining. They like looking at stuff and whining like I did in that previous podcast, although, I kind of do it deliberately because I know it's going to touch some spots for various people. But I don't spend all my time whining about the nature of existence. There's absolutely no point doing that. God is infinite, or nature is infinitely large and powerful and all the rest of it, and I am as nothing. And my complaints will not be heard. Even if they were legitimate, they will not be heard. So here Spinoza is laying out the ground. He doesn't want a life full of shit and woe and sadness. He wants a life that is supremely joyful for all eternity. But there was a price to be paid, and I haven't put the rest of it here. He said he tried to attain this while he was still pursuing his other interests, fame, money, and he just said that it didn't work, so he reached a point where he had to sacrifice some things to pursue this. Anyway, so the important point here is that Spinoza made a conscious decision to go after joy and happiness. He wasn't going to live a sad life, and he set about to find out how to do that. Now, another part of Spinoza. This is from letter 21, and it's quite revealing. I mentioned when we were going through the definitions and axioms in part 1 of the Ethics that this might not be true. In fact, the word truth has no meaning for it at all. And at some point, the ambition of this grows and grows. At some point, maybe we'll do a little bit of Nietzsche, because somewhere, I can't remember where it is now, it might be the start of Beyond Good and Evil. He's talking about truth, and how truth has been paraded by philosophers, like little girls at a tea party parading their dresses, as though they have some access to it. And as Nietzsche says, and he's quite right, there's no such thing as truth. How can we possibly know the truth of existence. We sort of small, insignificant, a speck, Spinoza calls it. How can we know the truth? Ridiculous. Anyway, so in letter 21 he says, and even if I were once to find untrue the fruits which I have gathered from my natural understanding, they would still make me happy. Oh my God, he's not wedded to the idea that what he's doing is necessarily true. He just enjoys it. Because the natural state for human beings, and this is what I call the mark of the beast, is that we do things because we want some kind of reward for it. So we go chasing after maybe, I don't know, religion, some spiritual thing, some philosophical thing, because we believe there's some end product there, something that is going to be something we can hang on the wall. I've got a certificate in truth, hang it on the wall. But let me read that again. And even if I were once to find untrue the fruits which I have gathered from my natural understanding, they would still make me happy, for I enjoy them, and seek to pass my life not in sorrowing and sighing, but in peace, joy, and cheerfulness, and so I ascend a step higher. Beautiful, beautiful words. This is the thing with Spinoza. Those letters around 2021 are just absolutely loaded with good stuff. You could spend years studying those and plumbing the depths of them. I will do a specific podcast at some point on how Spinoza is so similar to Zen. It's just uncanny how similar his assertions and ideas are to Zen. Yeah, I'm not going to go there now, but I could feel a fairly large digression coming on, but I'm not going to do it. Anyway, so this is what he wanted to do. And so what did he do? He set about finding out how to live a life in peace, joy, and cheerfulness. He didn't sit about whining. Didn't look at videos of lions ripping open the bellies of wildebeest and embryos dropping out and things like that. We know it's a shit show. We've established that. It's a shit show for a lot of the creatures that live on this planet. But, as I've said many times, where your attention is, there will be your heaven or your hell. We can look at that stuff forever, but it serves no purpose whatsoever. All it does is diminish our power. So, let me get on to the next slide. This is the genius of Spinoza. He found out how to turn lead into gold. Now, this is a term that was used with some people that I knew a long time ago now. But the real sense or the real meaning of alchemy in a, I don't know what you call it, spiritual, I'll use the word spiritual, in a spiritual sense, is to turn all our suffering into pleasure. That is the meaning of alchemy, turning lead into gold, turning suffering into pleasure. So, what is the lead? Well, the lead is kind of shaped like this. God or nature, and remember, God is not a person. God is not necessarily a conscious thing in the same way that we are. Nature as a whole may have some kind of consciousness, it may not. It may just be a blind thing. And some people I knew would say that it is indeed a blind thing, and the great significance of man is that he makes nature self-aware to some extent. Is that true? I don't know. I don't care. What I'm really concerned about is my own happiness. I don't want to live a life of misery. So the lead, God nature is indifferent. Spinoza says that quite explicitly. I think it's Proposition 33 in Part 1 of the Ethics. And God is not good. I've been through this before. So God is not good. God is indifferent and infinitely powerful. And to use Spinoza's words, we are specks. We don't matter. There are infinitely larger laws and things going on in the cosmos and in nature than the welfare of man. So, this is a bit of an issue, isn't it, of course, because we are not indifferent. We're driven to persist. We are driven to continue with our existence, and we'll do almost anything to ensure that. And in the scale of things, we're very small and very vulnerable, both as a species and as individuals. So we can't, pretend that we are God, because we're not indifferent and we're not infinitely powerful. God isn't constrained by anything external, but we are. Things will affect us, other people, other things, material things, other ideas, other events, whatever happens, they will affect us, and they will cause us to experience passions. And the passions are very simple to understand. When our power for existence is enhanced, then we feel some positive emotion, to use the normal lingo. But when things go against us, then we feel a sad passion or a negative emotion, because our power is diminished. That's all that we're ever registering, this power of our existence. As I've said many times, if you win the lottery, I don't know, whatever it is that would float your boat, if that happens, then you're going to feel enhanced. You're going to feel more powerful in life. If you find you've got some horrible illness, or your partner's just run off with somebody or whatever, then you're going to feel diminished and you're going to have a sad passion. And let me at this point just remind you of what Spinoza says about pity and envy, because that's the way we work typically. So I don't know if anybody looked at the my wife tells me I've got a very sick mind. I don't know if you've looked at the zombie woodpecker video on YouTube. I mean, it's grotesque. There's a woodpecker flies onto the nest of some pigeon chicks, and just starts pecking away at their heads. It's apparently developed a taste for pigeon brain, and so it sort of sucks out and eats their brains while they're alive, hence the name the zombie woodpecker. So we look at that and we're kind of horrified. Well, why are we horrified? Well, because we pity it, or that we pity the pigeons, and it reminds us of diminished power. I shall have to do a whole podcast on that at some point as well. And this is where compassion comes from. Yeah, I will have to do a podcast, because there is unconscious compassion and there's conscious compassion, but it's another story. So anyway, we either pity something or we envy it. If we see someone having huge good fortune, and particularly if they are someone that we consider to be a peer, then we will probably envy them. And envy is a form of hatred. And this is how we live our lives, affected by these passions. So, I've digressed a little bit. The lead is the fact that we are small and vulnerable, we are affected by other things, and many of the things will affect us negatively, and we have sad passions. Some things will affect us positively, and we'll get all excited and happy, but it's still a passion. There's nothing really satisfying in it. Because, as I've explained in the roller coaster podcast, the only thing that makes a difference is a change of power. It's not the actual level of power, it's the change of power. So once you've got your $10 million from the lottery, then at some point, a year or two down the line maybe, you're bored with it. You're bored of the pina coladas and the Bugattis and whatever else. And you want something else. So it's a roller coaster. There's no satisfaction in it. Just being a passive recipient or a passive responder to external events, people, things. So that's the lead. The lead is just the raw energy of us being pushed around by external things and our responses to those things. That is the lead. So the alchemy is that we can convert that lead via a particular process. And that process, as I've explained in other podcasts, is that of becoming active within us. Now, to become active, you have to have understanding. As Spinoza outlines in great detail in part 3 and 4 of the Ethics, we have to understand why we are feeling like we're feeling. So this is the sound practice thing. You have to be able to sense how you feel first of all, then you have to be able to observe it, and then you have to understand it, because a lot of people, most people you will meet are totally out of touch with their emotions. They don't know how they feel. They have some bullshit thing going on in their head about that they're happy when inside they might be horribly sad and angry. Or I've seen it the other way around, that people who come over as being dour and down in the mouth are actually, like little bouncing babies inside, just wonderfully happy. But they don't know it. Happy and you don't know it. Anyway, so we have to have that process. We have to be able to understand why what is happening to us is happening. When we do that, we become active. We're no longer just a passive recipient of external influences. So when we become active, we assume more power. This is what this whole game is about, power. This is what Spinoza figured out. He said and I know I always quote it, but Proposition 4, Part 4 of the Ethics, the striving to persist in our existence is the actual power of God. It's neither good nor bad, it's just the way the damn thing works. And so we want power, and if we're going to be happy and joyful, then that power has to be ours, not the result of some external events that make us happy for a few days and then we get pissed off for a few days, and so on and so forth. So we become active. When we become active, we assume more power and we experience pleasure. That's what pleasure is. It is the feeling of having more power. My daily bread, that's a term I use a lot, but part of my daily bread anyway, is, if I'm grumpy about something, I've got to go and do some shit tomorrow I don't want to do. I'll probably get grumpy, but I will be there. I will be looking at why I'm grumpy, because some of it is, one of the things is a trip to the hospital, not for anything particularly serious, but I've got to go to the hospital, but I don't want to go. Well, why don't I want to go? Because hospitals are sort of life-diminishing places. And, I just analyse why I feel like I feel and all the rest of it. So that's the alchemy. And then we get to the gold. Well, Spinoza talks endlessly about adequate ideas. An adequate idea is an idea, and we're going to have to go into part 2 again, but an adequate idea or an adequate cause. Let's talk about adequate causes, it's a bit more relevant here. An adequate cause is when you are the sole cause of what is happening. When you become active within yourself, despite the fact that you just learned you've lost $100,000, when you become active and look at that and understand why you feel as you feel, you become active, and this is to share God's nature to some extent, just a small extent, because God, nature with a capital N, and we'll have to go into this at some point as well, is wholly active. It knows no passivity. So when we become active, we share in God's nature. And in fact, kind of, as I say, we hitch a bit of a ride on God's nature. So to finish this, I'll requote that bit from Spinoza. So the result is we lose the sad passions. We become happy, joyful. Not all the time, obviously. Some things will probably overwhelm us at some point, but generally speaking, we're happier. We're more cheerful. So we lose sad passions, and to quote Spinoza, and so he's speaking about himself, and seek to pass my life not in sorrowing and sighing, but in peace, joy, and cheerfulness, and so I ascend a step higher. Absolutely beautiful.